It is so good to see all of you, especially people who have come back after a long time away. Welcome back. This is our Welcoming Back Sunday. So people have been traveling over the summer. Some people have come back from long recoveries and are back with us. It's good to see all of you. Want to do a special welcome. I hope, Anise, that you are online. Anise was going to be at our chaplaincy dinner on Tuesday, and as Annie was picking her up, she had just fallen down the stairs and needed to go to the ER, has some broken ribs. I'm going to let her tell the rest of the story, but Anise, if you're online, you are very, very welcome with us on this Welcoming Sunday. So here at FCC San Rafael, we really want to create a place where people feel welcome and experience a sense of belonging. Whoever you are, you belong with us. And we believe that we extend a sense of hospitality to all, and that when we do that, we do exactly what Jesus did throughout his ministry. Because whenever Jesus reaches out, he makes it clear that the people he talks to, the people that he heals, he makes it clear that they know that they matter, know that they belong. I mean, we just hear that in the story of the 5,000, which we now have read several times this month. Jesus and his disciples are trying to get to a quiet place, but then the crowd figures out where Jesus is, and they run ahead and meet him before he can get to a quiet place. And instead of leaving, he extends hospitality. He welcomes them. He says, okay, you are welcome here. You're welcome with me. And he does that again when the disciples say, why don't you send them home at this point? Because they must be hungry. We for sure are hungry. And we'd like to have some time to ourselves. And Jesus again shows his hospitality and says, no, the people belong here. Why don't you give them something to eat? Now, that's very different from what we see in our days. Whenever dignitaries come to a city or a town for an important meeting, the streets are swept clean, not just of debris, but also of the people who live on those streets. It would be a quite different model if, like Jesus, our governing structures and the people who support those structures would say, no, the people belong here. They do not need to go. Why don't you feed them? Why don't you provide housing and showers? Now, Jesus' hospitality extended well beyond offering food and shelter. He had a way of extending his whole being, his body, his heart, his spirit. In all of that, he made people feel welcome. He listened and connected so that the people felt that they were seen. He created a possibility of radical inclusion for those who had been marginalized. Will you pray with me? God, we give you thanks for all of the work that is happening here and elsewhere in communities and organizations where people are stepping up to protect the lives of those who others are deeming not as important. We thank you for Lisa and for the work that the Marin Cultural Center is doing. And we thank you that we may collaborate and cooperate together. Will now the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts resonate within your spirit. Amen. Amen. So this is week 3 in our 4-week series on Changemakers. We are looking at some of the attributes, some of the skills that we can develop to support our efforts to be effective changemakers in the world. In the places where we live, our families, our communities, places where we work. And our starting point in week 1 was compassion. We need to start with compassion, with a willingness to see, a willingness to be with, to suffer with, so that we're able to resonate with what is happening in the world around us. And then last week, we explored the skill of collaboration. We really do need each other, and I think Lisa's words made that clear this morning. I mean, they can do what they can do, but they need the collaboration and the connection with churches and with other organizations to really have the impact that they are looking for. And this week we will look at the skill and the importance of making room for creativity, for thinking outside the box, trusting that there may be many ways of being, many solutions that we have not even thought of yet. I mean, things develop so fast in the world that we can barely keep track, let alone that we know and can figure out what the solutions are. We need really be able to be creative, to think about it. So let me start actually with a very ancient story from the Taoist tradition. It's a story of practicing hospitality to one's own spirit. It's the story about the Prince of Lu. He's probably connected to the Zhao dynasty. And he orders his master woodcarver, who's named King, to make a bell stand, to make a wooden structure in which a heavy, heavy bell could hang and be employed. Now, it wasn't unusual in those days that if you messed up, you could not only lose your job, you could actually lose your life over it. And that creates what we could call somewhat of a stressful job situation. And for most people, that would not be a place to actually be able to create from. But here is the story. King, the master carver, made a bell stand of precious wood. And when it was finished, all who saw it were astounded. They said it must be the work of spirits. The Prince of Lu said to the master carver, "What is your secret?" And King replied, "I'm only a workman. I have no secret. There's only this. When I began to think about the work that you commanded me to do, I guarded my spirit. I did not spend my spirit on things that were not to the point. I did not spend my spirit on little things. I fasted. I fasted in order to set my heart at rest. And after 3 days of fasting, I had forgotten about gain and successes. After 5 days of fasting, I had forgotten about praise or criticism. By this time, all thoughts of your highness and of the courts had faded away. All that might distract me from the work had vanished. I was collected in the single thought of the bell stand. And it was at that point that I went to the forest to see the trees in their own natural state. And when the right tree appeared before my eyes, the bell stand also appeared in it, clearly, beyond doubt. All I had to do was to put forth my hand and begin. If I had not met this particular tree, if I had not seen the possibilities in this tree, there would have been no bell stand at all. So what happened? My own collected thought encountered the hidden potential in the wood. And from this life encounter came the work which you ascribe to the spirits. It's a beautiful story. I thought for a minute to print it out and to give it to all of us and then say, go, take this home and meditate on for a week and then come back and let's talk about what you think about this. Because it's a story of remarkable creativity. And people so resonated with the beauty of this bell stand that they felt it must have been the work of spirits. Now, to be identified as the Prince Master Carver, for sure, this man must have had great skills and great techniques. But that was actually not what he relied on. And what we are hearing in this story are some of the elements that make up for profound creative processes. The Master Carver first cleared his mind, and he settled his heart, so that he would not be driven by praise, and so that he would not be swayed by any critique. so that he would not be worried about the outcome. That's often what we worry about before we start something, right? Like, is this going to work? How's it going to work? What is it going to look like? He said he could not let his mind go there. He did not want to be worried about the income. He came to a place where his spirit could rest within a much larger space, where his spirit was connected to a much larger presence, so that he could listen very deeply to what was moving inside of him. And it was only then that he engaged with the world around him and could really see the potential of what was possible. And then he set out to go to work, trusting that what was revealed to him was what he needed to work on, and he stayed with it. And the people who saw the bell stand could feel just how deeply he had engaged in this process. That is the beauty of contemplative life. It's the beauty of prayer and the beauty of meditation, of quieting ourselves down. When we allow ourselves to come to rest in a much larger space, it's in that space that spirit is just a little bit more able to move through us, to touch us. And sometimes we get so worried. I do. We get so worried that our whole beings contract, including our minds. I don't think I'm the only one who perseverates sometimes about what is happening in the world and what we can do. It is actually literally what our bodies do. Our muscles contract. And that means that our heart muscle contracts as well. We cannot separate out our heart muscle from our other muscles. And when we are caught like that, it is really hard to see new possibilities. It is really hard to create something new from that place. It's hard not to keep thinking about the same thing over and over. The master carver said, under this enormous pressure of needing to create this bell stand, what I did was to quiet down and to guard my spirit. Under enormous pressure, what I did was to quiet down and to guard my spirit until I could even let go of the outcome. Guarding our spirit leads to creativity, and creativity itself helps our spirits to thrive. Now, the story about the woman in Luke who anointed Jesus' feet is also a story about creativity, about being able to see something different, about being able to see how God's presence is revealed in ways that we may not have thought about. Now, the gospel writers are writing, of course, from the perspective of an incredible male-dominated society, right? Luke does not even seem to know, or does not seem to care, about the name of this woman. Now, if he knows that she's a sinner, for sure, he would have known her name as well. In order to identify her as such, he must have known more about her. And it is good to keep in mind that women in that time who did not completely live by the rules of male-dominant society were easily identified as sinners. It is, however, not the part of the story where Jesus draws the attention to. And most likely, this woman had some interactions with Jesus before we hear even about this story. Interactions that seem to have had a profound impact on her. And she experiences Jesus as someone who relates to others, who even relates to her with a boundary-breaking attitude. Of course, she was not expected to be a part of the scene that we read about. Of course, she was not expected to even touch Jesus. But Jesus sees her as so much more than what society has labeled her as. He probably saw all of her, and all of her felt seen without any judgment. And she was so deeply moved by that she went to see him, even if that meant walking into the house of a Pharisee, which she probably should not have done. She too broke the boundaries of what was acceptable behavior for her. And in deep gratitude, she anoints his feet and expressed in that way her connection with him. And in that moment, something of God's kingdom gets revealed. Something of God's kingdom gets revealed. God's kingdom where things are turned upside down, where relationships are honored which are based on pure love, based on connection. They're not based on how you are labeled or what your place is in society. This story shows us very clearly this is how God intends for people to be together. And Jesus, of course, is right there with her. He can see her way of so creatively expressing herself in her own authentic way. He can see her courage. Now, Simon, the Pharisee, is, of course, a little beside himself, seeing all of this unfold. And you can just feel the judgment emanating from him. Is Jesus really letting this woman touch him? And that, I think, is where Jesus draws the attention. And he says, Simon, I have something to say to you. Now, that's a bit ominous, right? Jesus says to you, hey, I have something to say to you. And Simon says, teacher, speak. And then Jesus calls him out for being so caught up in rules and regulations, how things are done, how things should be done, for his insistence that people need to stay in their relegated spaces, so much so that he, Simon, cannot see that God's presence is moving through this woman and moving through this interaction that she has with Jesus. How this whole story, how this whole interaction sets her free. Do you see this woman? Jesus says. Now, when I entered your house, Simon, you didn't give me water for my feet, which was custom at the time, as a sign of hospitality. But she wet my feet with tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't greet me with a kiss, but she hasn't stopped kissing my feet since I came in. You didn't anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed all of my feet. So she has shown great love. See, Jesus always draws the circle wider of who is included. Now, creativity requires a different way of seeing a situation differently so that we can find a solution, seeing people differently so we can be in right relationship with them, and seeing ourselves differently so we can change our own inner judgment, our thoughts about ourselves that are judgmental, and our thoughts about other people, which are judgmental. Now, the only way that the master carver could see differently, to see the potential and the beauty of the tree, which eventually became the bell stand, was to guard his spirit, to come back to a space of presence so that he could see and resonate with the trees around him. Something very powerful when we take time and listen deeply to what really moves within us, what is moving us, based on our narrative of our lives, based on our experience, based on our passions. What is it that really moves within us? And then when we find that, to find creative ways to bring that forth into the world as our gift to give. And then what we do, however large or small, can reveal something of God's realm, can reveal something about how God intends for people to be together. As I said, just this last Tuesday at a chaplaincy dinner, there was an enormous amount of food brought in, and somehow that got created into a very good meal. And in the process of that, what was also created was a place for people to connect, to come off the street for a little bit, to find a place of belonging, to find a place where there was enough and more than enough. They found a place of hospitality. And I bet that was happening for the crowd of some 5,000 people who got fed according to the story in Mark as well. The disciples got over their startledness and trusted that Jesus had a larger understanding of what was possible. So people got put together in smaller groups so that they could relate to each other, so they could get to know one another. And they got fed and drawn into this sense of belonging. Now, we all can create, really. I know people say, I don't have a creative bone in my body. Well, if you didn't have a creative bone in your body, you probably would not have a body. We all really can create. So one of the women who was going through this Changemakers process that we've been talking about realized just how much gun violence had affected her childhood. And so she decided to start a group with other people to talk to folks around her and other organizations about the need for gun control, about the need to protect lives. Helen, we spoke last week about you making the cards for the church. We've tried to find a good structure for that until Helen said, hey, I can do that. And after the service, she let me know, you know what? I'm just very happy that I found a way to give back to our beloved community. Another example, before Jerry left, he told me that the choir most likely would be able to sing something at some point, you know, if we used some of the music that we had and that they were familiar with. And sure enough, after a few weeks, we started to really miss the music. And so I was a little afraid to impose upon the choir members, but I said, hey, can you all sing at this service? And he said, oh, yeah. And so they went to work and created a whole new way, I think, of practicing, of being together. And so they sang in that service, and right after the service, they said, can we do that again? Because that's how they create. That's what their gift is. That's what their passion is. That is what they bring into the world. And I was quite surprised that just last Sunday, the first time that you were back, that the choir was already ready to go and singing, and they will be singing today as well. From time to time, I ask people, does what you are doing connect up for you? Does the way that you sustain others, does the way that you sustain the church also sustain you? Because that is really the most life-giving way and the most sustaining way that we can work together. And then there are always some tasks that are left over that just need to get done, and then we divvy them up. So far, I have had nobody come up to me and say, you know, Pastor, washing those 30 little glasses after communion service really makes my heart sing. I'm still waiting. It may happen at one time. So what people are not passionate about, okay, there they are, and we'll work them out and we'll divvy it up. But we all can create. To be a change maker, we need to trust that we have the ability to create, that we all have the ability to bring forth something into the world that will reveal something of God's realm, of God's presence. So blessed are the change makers. Blessed are you for not believing the lie that this is how they will always remain, this is always how the world will remain. Blessed are you whose life ambition is to bring the change that is justice and mercy for all. Blessed are you who know that God has always employed the faithful acts of ordinary people to heal and to change the world. Know that change can begin today. Amen. Amen. We'll take a moment of quiet reflection, and then we'll hear the choir who's going to sing, Draw the Circle Wider.